Orm Lorch an ábhar seo inniu, an ábhar fear havachtuk seo. Child poverty is not only an affront to the human dignity of the children who are impacted, but to all of us in this state. It is also something that we have been talking about for a long time in this House. Indeed, as I was researching this particular issue, I came across statements from the former Minister for Education, Seamus Brennan, from 1992 on the publication of the Green Paper on Education, Education for a Changing World. The Green Paper spoke about equipping our children with sufficient rates of education so that they could avoid the poverty traps of deprivation and generational unemployment, which is a key indicator of child poverty rates. 30 years later, and we are still talking about the role of education in helping children find routes out of poverty. And while there is a situation where we have a cycle of disadvantage and education has a very important role to play, it certainly shouldn't lie with the education sector or the education system to sort all of these problems out. And that's where government must step up to the mark and stop trying to ship it to another sector or pass it to another charity. There must be meaningful actions from government, and it shouldn't take the constant reports, which are very informative, from the Children's Ombudsman, Dr. Niall Muldoon. It shouldn't take that. Government should be more proactive and see for themselves and anticipate what needs to be done in advance, and indeed allow for all of that and plan for all of that. While we have achieved some progress, clearly some of the policies in those intervening decades have been failures, because children still go to bed hungry at night in this state. I accept that the school meals programme is a success. Indeed, I know from information provided to me from former Minister Regina Doherty that funding towards the provision of food to some 1,580 schools and organisations benefited 250,000 children in 2019 at a total cost of €54 million. The objective of this scheme is to provide regular, nutritious food to children who are unable, due to the lack of good quality food, to take full advantage of the education being provided to them. Unfortunately, the provision of this service to vulnerable children was massively disrupted by the COVID-19 emergency. This does not mean that brilliant and heroic efforts were not made by individual schools, by the Catholic Church and charitable organisations, the GAA and many others. I also spoke recently about helping our children avoid the pitfalls of geographical disparities in terms of broadband access and the resource inequalities that thousands of students endure. I mean, these students are doing their utmost to try and break the cycle of disadvantage that they have been entrapped in. And yet then they're faced with more barriers. And we've seen that time and time again from the HEA, who have shown us the reports and who have more or less confirmed what we all knew, that the students from the most affluent areas will progress and will stay in third level, whereas we have problems with students progressing from disadvantaged areas, and where the dropout rates are higher also, because the students can't contend with the barriers they face each day. And while we're on this issue, I do want to mention the fact that, students from disadvantaged areas who go to college, who work part-time, do everything right, and then they're faced with the accommodation crisis where they don't have accommodation. I mean, those issues need to be sorted out if we are truly willing and hopeful of eradicating child poverty and indeed disadvantage in this state. As a former educator and principal, I feel that this is an issue that needs to be very, very strongly addressed and robustly addressed. It is an issue that is close to my own heart because I have taught in disadvantaged areas, but it is also one of my main policy priorities. That is why back in the pre-COVID world of October 2019, the re-establishment of the Education Committee, I raised this issue because I feel that the re-establishment of the Education Disadvantage Committee needs to be done. I feel it's an action that's very worthwhile. Of course, there will always be variation in educational quality, but what we have now is something entirely different to that. We have a system that actively maintains educational discrimination and a closing down of opportunities for capable and very interested and bright students. In effect, and specifically in terms of broadband and tech access, we are continuing to send our children to the equivalent of the digital poorhouse, which is a term drawn from Virginia Eubanks's book, Automating Inequality. For that is exactly what we appear to be doing. We are also enrolling students into a system of diminished expectations and indeed, unfortunately, diminished outcomes. The same applies for housing and the potential of families to own their own homes. It is not about doing more, it is about just getting it right. 10 effective policy poverty-reducing measures are better than 10,000 ineffective policies that go nowhere and do not bear fruits. And I think we need to learn that lesson quickly and act accordingly. Garv Magad.